Hi gang, it's day 3 on my creative COVID video diary. It is Friday the 20th of March 2020. Things haven't really changed in many respects, but I thought I'd do another entry today. So in case you're just picking up on this, basically this is my way of getting through the fact that, like most creatives at the moment, I'm essentially unemployed. And I want to talk about and try and get myself in a more positive mindset. I'm talking about some of the things that I've done before, some of the things I'm hoping to do in the future creatively, and also some of the people who have inspired me and who I've met along the way. And because it's the 20th of March, there's only one thing that's really on my mind to talk about, and that's the fella on screen behind me here. This is my friend Robert Lane, who passed away 2 years ago today. So he's just in my mind, and it would be churlish of me not to talk about him to some extent. Let me see, where can I start with this? Because the sort of ending of this isn't the most positive endings ever, but we'll talk a little bit about how I met Rob. I guess I think it's a good reminder about how important social media can actually be. I think a lot of us now have gotten to this mindset where we think that the internet is a bad place full of bad people and nothing good will ever come of it. Although, as many of you who are tuning into this will be aware, there's a lot of good that can come out of it as well. Lots of people have met each other through the internet, whether it be online dating, not that you'd ever catch me doing any of that, or creative collaborations. And Rob was one of those people who I kind of met in my early days of the internet. We knew each other for the best part of 20 years in the end, and it's very strange when I look back on it. I met him as I was coming out of my teens. I was doing a website at the time all about Hammer films, and one day out of the blue I got this email that said "Greetings from the Emerald Isle," and my response back to Rob was, "That's funny enough. That's exactly where I am as well," and that was the start of a good friendship. I ended up we conversed. We used to chat on the old Hammer Yahoo groups forum, or back when I think it was one list, and then we got chatting privately as well. We were talking about films that we hadn't seen. He'd seen a lot more than I had, a lot of them in the cinemas back in the day, and eventually they came to the point where I went down to Dublin to meet him. And I stayed over for several days. Me being so young and naive at the time, this was the first person I'd ever met off the internet, which was filled with a certain amount of trepidation. And we sat, and I had to give lots of contact details to a few friends who lived down there. There were very clear instructions about when I was going to phone and stuff to check in, just in case this guy turned out to be some sort of creepy murderer or rapist or both. It was always a very real worry back then, and for a lot of people, quite sensibly, it's still a worry today. As it turned out, he wasn't. He was just a very nice fella who was very, very passionate about his love for the genre, for the Hammer films and the horrors. And I remember spending several days with him, chatting away, and he introduced me to some rather obscure material, including the likes of Never Take Sweets from a Stranger and Clean Sweep, I seem to recall watching at his house, and The Snorkel, way back before Indicator ever got their hands on any of those. I'd seen them, and I remember that influenced a lot of how I chatted on the forums back in the day, because already my frame of reference had gone beyond the horror films, and that was something that he always encouraged me to do. I started a PhD looking at sort of Hammer's pre-horror stuff. I spent about a year formally working on it. I've done quite a lot of research apart from that. And it was something that probably started off with him opening my eyes to the fact that there was more than just horror films, that there was a whole bunch of other stuff out there that, for me, continues to be far more interesting. Those are the stories I think that still haven't been told. Those are the stories that I want to tell. And hopefully someday I'll finish my work on this. Rob and I had a pretty normal but in fairly intense relationship in its own wee way. I got told at his wake that it was very unusual for Rob to have friends who weren't gay, and so that was kind of nice that he was somebody who trusted a lot in me over the years. It got to the point where we told each other pretty much everything. We both had gone through our creative ups and downs and our personal ups and downs as well. And one of the things that Rob said to me, and I referenced this on one of my posts the other day, was that you should try and, when you work in the arts, pigeonhole yourself a little bit. Try and only do the one thing. Don't be spreading yourself too thinly, because when you do, it makes things very, very complicated indeed. And I'm the sort of idiot who decides to do a bit of everything. I'd like to think it's because I'm a little bit good at some of it, but just sometimes it doesn't take, and so you're forced into having to stick with different things and flip from project to project. And Rob had been a bit like that as well. He was a theatre designer, production designer, whenever I met him. I was also teaching in some of the colleges down in Dublin, and his work was pretty intense and pretty fascinating. He'd done a little bit of work out in Hollywood once upon a time, and worked a lot in the Dublin stage. And I remember hanging out with him and meeting some of the people on the streets that he worked with, not in the streets, but, you know, out and about when we were walking around Dublin. I went to the college a couple of times with him as well, before he got laid off from there. And we worked together a few times, once professionally, and a couple of times on sort of stuff I was doing for college. So the shot behind us here, and you can see that young looking fellow there as well. Him here, that's me. Good grief. And that was for a Channel 4 documentary on film fans, directed by Andy Kimpton-Nye. Hi Andy, long time no see. Basically this was one in a series, and this one was all about Hammer films. I'd been approached to do the piece, and I was asked about other fans, and I got them in touch with Rob, because I thought he'd be really interesting, and we've got to hang out. And Wayne Kinsey as well, and Wayne showed some of his props in that itself. So it was quite good, because me and Rob ended up spending a day in Black Park, which was, for me, like a mecca. This was the place where they shot a lot of the location work for the Hammer films over the years. And I certainly never thought I'd be in a situation of being able to see that stuff myself. And walking around it was quite an eerie experience. So there's a little bit of that on the doc that survives. I have it up on my YouTube channel, in case you're interested. There's a little bit about that, and also, you know, we went back a few years later. Went to one of the Bray days in Bray Studios, and we took a day off to go driving around the countryside, which was hairy in its own little way. But we ended up down in Black Park and had a wander around there, taking lots and lots of photographs. And each of the locations, like, you can just walk around and you can see it. And what I recall about the day of filming in Black Park that we did was three things. One, Rob going for a pee behind the bushes because his bladder just had no control whatsoever, and him muttering whilst we were still being mic'd up and filmed, "I peed on me shoes." Aside from that, I recall sitting on this very, very hard post, this pointed, very angular post, beside the lake, for what seemed like an eternity as we did the interview, getting gradually more and more uncomfortable. And I also remember that day they were filming an advert which I think was for Volkswagen. Because one of the filming locations that we had booked, we weren't allowed to film in because of the filming, and later on I remember seeing the advert actually in the cinemas, so it was nice to know that it actually got somewhere. But that was quite nice, that was fun. I just started my undergrad at the time when we shot this, and some of my colleagues in uni had seen it as well. So that was the only time we worked professionally, but I did manage to rope him into a couple of projects along the way, whilst I was working on my own film degrees. Back in my undergrad days, for my final film project, I did a sort of short horror film that was partly inspired by the Hammers, and I got Rob up to do the part of a creepy butler, which he did very well. The film itself, it's experimental, it doesn't completely work. I'm not 100% happy with it, but you know what, it's there, it's fun, it's also up on YouTube. And I recall distinctly we filmed in this little old Catholic school in West Belfast, and we were in a chapel. In the back of the chapel there's this little platform where you could look down over what was happening down below, and Rob sat there working away on one of his sets for the theatre. And I remember my classmates at the time kind of talking about this, because it gave them a real chance to actually see somebody at work, working for the industry that we all at the time hoped that we might end up being part of. So that's what we did that one. And then when I did my master's, also in film at Queen's, I did a little documentary piece, which I've never shown. I might actually try and add it up onto my YouTube feed as well. But it was a piece about Rob had been quizzed as part of a rape investigation that had happened down in Clancy where he lived. And I remember him being so utterly appalled at the time. First, that they would suggest that he was capable of doing it, and also that, he'd been roped in, and he felt really, really really hampered, really undignified in the way that it had been handled. He felt like he'd been violated himself whenever they took his DNA. And I thought it was quite an interesting turn on things. You know, I have many, many thoughts that I'd probably share elsewhere about those sort of processes itself, but to be falsely accused, and insinuated that you did something and to be investigated like that clearly does have a toll. So it was just a short little piece. My professor at the time, my film prof, dismissed the whole thing, dismissed Rob as being camp, which I thought was deeply unfair, and completely ignored the point of what was going on in the piece itself. But there you go. That was the only times we got to work together. We did spend a lot of time chatting about stuff. He would always push me in terms of my own work, and constantly try and drive me to do something that was a bit more interesting, that was new. He was always a little bit disappointed whenever I didn't finish the PhD, whenever I ran into problems, whenever one project would get too much for me and I'd have to put it to the side. And that's a guilt that I still feel a great deal of. He was so critical at times. I mean, I loved him to bits, but he could be such a dick as well, and he knew it. And his friends, of which there weren't many, but we all knew it too. And Rob had, I remember he came to see me perform once, for One City One Book in Dublin. I think it must have been 2006. We screened Dracula, the Hammer Dracula, and I did an intro for it one night. I also did a panel conversation with a couple other notable experts, including Brian Charles, Sorka Flynn, and Kim Newman. So we did that. Was that 2006, 2008? But I'd done the Dracula intro, and Rob had come to see that, and whatever happened that night, there was a guy in the front row who was making very strange gesticulations with his hand. I've always likened it to, the Monty Python thing, where this sort of thing, just there's hand gestures, and it threw me completely, and I dried. And he never let me forget it. In all the years that we had worked together, in all the times I had done radio, I had done personal appearances, that I'd done Q&As and stuff, that was the only one he ever saw me in, and that's the one he would never let me forget. Yeah, what a dick. It's worse than my parents. Yeah, so that was always pretty hard and pretty harsh. He was brutal in his cynicism sometimes, but also a lovely man. And I'm in this weird situation where after he died, I inherited part of his collection of material. Something he always said that was that when he died, that the Hammer stuff would always come to me. I would always tell him that, I don't want to think about that, Rob. I mean, I want you alive. You're going to be here for a long time. Let's not even talk about it. But seemingly he was sincere about that, and I've ended up with stuff. One of the things I have is a collection of scrapbooks that he has. These wonderful, let's see if I can show you these. There's not an easy way to do this today. These fab scrapbooks full of old trade adverts for films and posters and stuff. The sort of things that's like the collector in me goes, why are these pasted in, Rob? I wish you hadn't done this. But they're kind of fun. There's loads of these, but I did find in one of them, I was looking through these. See if I can get this here. This one here is really nice. This newspaper clipping from 1975, and there Rob is, which surprised me with one of his posters. And at that point, he was secretary of the Dracula Society down in Dublin. There was a whole side to him that he talked about, but I never really knew what was going on and how much of that was true or not. I suppose part of the reason I want to do this piece is just to remind people, and just to sort of, I don't know, I guess I owe it to him in some respects. I always thought the world of him. He was a great mentor over the years. He was very, very encouraging, and he was there for me whenever I went through some absolutely hellish times in my personal life. And as a friend, that was really, really important. I mean, whenever you're working in the creative arts, it can get really, really difficult. It can get quite tense. It can get quite upsetting. But Rob was always there and pushed me in a very positive way, I always felt. But I'm still sort of struck by the point in which he passed. I mean, Rob made the decision to end his own life, and that hasn't sat well with me the last couple of years. I've had many a sleepless night over it, and he was the first of two friends that I lost within 51 weeks, just under a year. to suicide, and it struck home and still does. I've been trying to find a creative way of processing this and of dealing with it. You may have seen that some of the Cine projects in the last year have been very geared around mental health, and we have tried to do a piece about suicide as well. We've got a podcast that we'll host at some point, which was partly inspired by Eric Steele's documentary The Bridge, about the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. But it's just a way of opening up a conversation. Again, working in the arts, I think it can be quite depressing. Now, Rob eventually moved away from working in the arts, and I think that was a bit of a shame, because he really was a performer until the day that he passed, constantly on form for the most part. And he had talked to me about retiring at some point from the job that he was doing in the post office, and he wanted to build his own little home studio, and was going to do voiceovers, because he felt that as an older man there was a better call for him at that point than there had been in all the years previously. And it's something that I really wish that he had been able to do, because I missed that voice. I didn't use it to the best of my capabilities. I wish I had. I'm lucky I've got a couple of bits of film with him and some old audio recordings, so he sort of lives on in my head. I suppose that's the weird thing about this industry. People are dead, but they still live. You know, if you work in film, the voices are still there, the faces are there. It's just a world full of ghosts, really. But yeah, his choice has been a hard one to process. I mean, it's 2 years now, and I'm better at talking about it for the most part. Although, even last week, I had a conversation with somebody, and it was all going fine, and then just hit home again. Every now and then it just does, and I'm back in that point of grief. So for anyone who is having to process that, especially at a time like this, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think that there are a lot of people out there who are going through very, very difficult thought processes and everything else. And if you are struggling with that, the argument is you should reach out. I mean, try and talk to somebody if you can. Don't be afraid to talk, I think, is more important. I mean, I would always encourage people to talk, because talking for me has helped. But I think don't be afraid to. You know, have a chat with somebody if you can. If you can get a specialist, even better. Remember that this is not, whatever the worst is that's ever happened, it can get worse again. And I think, I don't know, I'm sort of glad he's not here. I don't know how he processed all of this. But back in the time, I think it would have been quite difficult. I think he would have struggled with this quite a bit. But maybe it would have put everything else that was going on in his head into perspective. I don't know. I mean, I've lots of thoughts about this stuff, but it's stuff I'll try and channel in my work more creatively, and that's one of the things, I guess, that is the lasting legacy, is that Rob's death and his life for me has inspired me to try and do other stuff that will hopefully try and help other people. Yeah. Sorry, folks, this has been quite a long one today. I don't know how many of you are actually going to sit through all 20 minutes of it, but thank you very much for listening. If you ever encountered Rob along the way, feel free to share your memories. I know some of the ones in Hammer fandom over the years would have encountered him at different points. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you were someone who unfortunately worked with him and me on a film set. I don't know. But yeah, it was a decent bloke, and I miss him a lot. There's not a day goes by where I don't think about him in some way, shape or form. So, it's a long legacy he has left for me, but I'm trying to channel that in a much better place now, and try and use that to motivate myself and do things more positively. There you go, my computer screen has decided to take him off the monitor behind me, which is quite a creepy thing to do. It's like he's decided to end the conversation. So I guess that's what we'll do, is we'll end the conversation at this point. Look, I'm going to try and do more of these. I may not get one done for another couple of days. We'll see how it goes over the weekend. I've got some ideas for some things I actually want to talk about, and some really interesting things, I think, in my archive that you might like to see as well, particularly if you're a nerd and into your film. So that's that. You will find me on Facebook, which is possibly where you got this video. Robert J.E. Simpson. You'll also find me on Twitter as Avalard, Avalard. I'm on Instagram as Robert J.E. Simpson as well, and I'm part of Cinepunked, Cinepunked, Cinepunked. We've got our website and all our social media stuff as well, and we've got some nice little film-related events happening, and some nice little film projects and some podcasts, and I'm going to get back down into editing a podcast for today, and then get back into my other projects as well. Thanks for listening, folks, and hopefully I'll talk to you again really soon.